In 2018, one of the world's most trusted aircraft manufacturers made a decision that would cost 346 lives, destroy billions in market value, and shake the entire aviation industry. This is the story of how Boeing's obsession with cost-cutting turned the 737 MAX into a death trap. This is 0 to billion. Imagine you're a passenger boarding a Boeing 737 MAX. You have no idea that the plane you're about to fly in was designed with a fatal flaw. Not because the engineers didn't know better, but because the executives decided that saving money was more important than saving lives. This is what happens when profit becomes the only metric that matters. Boeing wasn't always like this. For decades, they were the gold standard of aviation. They built planes that people trusted with their lives. But in the early 2000s, something changed. Airbus launched the A320neo, a fuel-efficient aircraft that was stealing Boeing's market share. Airlines loved it because it saved money on fuel. Boeing needed to respond fast, and they needed to respond cheap. Instead of designing a completely new aircraft, which would take years and billions of dollars, Boeing decided to modify their existing 737. The 737 had been flying since 1967. It was old, it was proven, and most importantly, it was already certified by regulators. This meant they could get the new plane to market faster and cheaper. They called it the 737 MAX, but there was a problem. The new engines were bigger and heavier. They had to be mounted higher on the wing to avoid scraping the ground. This changed the plane's aerodynamics in a dangerous way. The nose of the plane would naturally tilt upward during certain flight conditions. Boeing's engineers knew this. They knew it could cause the plane to stall, and they knew exactly how to fix it. They created a system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It was supposed to automatically push the nose down if the plane started tilting up too much. Sounds good, right? But here's where the cost-cutting begins. Boeing decided to use only one sensor to detect if the plane was tilting up. One sensor. If that sensor failed or gave wrong information, the system would still activate, pushing the nose down with no way for the pilots to stop it. Why only one sensor? Because adding a second sensor would cost extra money and require more pilot training. And more pilot training means more expenses for airlines. Boeing knew that airlines were price sensitive. They knew that if the 737 MAX required more expensive training than the old 737, airlines might choose Airbus instead. So they made a choice. They chose the cheaper option. Boeing also hid the existence of MCAS from pilots. They didn't tell them about this critical safety system. They didn't tell them how it worked. They didn't tell them how to disable it if something went wrong. Why? Because if they did, they would have to provide additional training, and that would cost money. Instead, they told airlines and pilots that the 737 MAX was essentially the same as the old 737. No new training needed. Just plug and play. In October 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta with 189 people on board. The plane's sensor was faulty. It was telling the MCAS system that the plane was tilting up when it actually wasn't. MCAS activated. The nose pushed down. The pilots didn't know what was happening. They didn't know about MCAS. They didn't know how to stop it. The plane crashed into the Java Sea. Everyone died. Boeing's response was shocking. They blamed the pilots. They said the pilots should have known how to handle this situation. They said the pilots should have been better trained. They said nothing was wrong with the plane. They didn't ground the fleet. They didn't issue a warning. They did nothing. 5 months later, in March 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed near Addis Ababa. 157 people died. Same problem, same sensor failure, same MCAS activation, same outcome. This time the world was watching. This time countries started grounding the 737 MAX. This time Boeing couldn't hide anymore. The investigation revealed everything. The cost-cutting decisions, the hidden system, the lack of pilot training, the single sensor, the lies. Boeing had prioritized profit over safety. They had gambled with people's lives, and they had lost. The The 737 MAX was grounded for 20 months. Boeing lost $100 billion in market value. They paid billions in fines and settlements. They paid billions to fix the plane. They lost the trust of the entire world. But most importantly, 346 people died because executives decided that saving a few $1 million on safety was worth the risk. This is the ultimate lesson of the Boeing 737 MAX. When you cut corners on safety to save money, you don't just lose money. You lose everything. You lose lives. You lose trust. You lose your reputation. You lose your future. Boeing learned this lesson the hard way, and the world will never forget. This is Zero to Billion, where we tell the stories of how the biggest brands in the world rise, and sometimes how they fall. Subscribe for more stories like this, because these lessons are worth learning.